Thinking about who you're going to vote for. There is a way to election and you haven't made up your mind yet. Pause. Think about it with intentional thought and consider where we go from here. Stay tuned and we hear from the professor, Dr. Chris Curry, and the analytic, C. Alan Johnson. Their perspectives on the best campaigns for what the people want and how we could get to move this country forward. Join our co-sponsors, Dom Dev Enterprises and Page Investment, and our friends at Islandese Realty, D1 Development, and Sammy's Chicken. Tell us where you are. Post your questions. Tell us why you are undecided, and we'll endeavor to answer or give you some perspective that you can use. Subscribe, like, follow, and share. Tell your friends that we are live because this can be a hot show because these two gentlemen are very energetic and they have a wealth of knowledge in their heads. We'll be right back.
Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles.
Welcome to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. This evening you can see on the screen two mighty men of the soil from around here. One a little beige and one a little darker beige. But we have Dr. Chris Curry in the top right-hand corner on your screen. And he is no stranger to the Bahamas. He's an author and he's also the professor at the university. So you know, universities have a critical role to play in society and policy. And we know that he will make that happen. And then on the bottom of the screen, we have C. Alan Johnson, who is a technocrat extraordinaire, a data analyst. And he has a wealth of information that data that he's always using to create information out of it, put meaning to it. And we look forward to his contributions this evening. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So this evening we want to have this discussion because in just 2 days, we're going to be having our general election. Last week, Thursday, we had the advanced polling, and that had little hiccups, but on the most part, it seemed to have gone well. And so this evening we want to talk about where we're going to be going as a country and forward and what's going to happen in this general election. So my first question to you both gentlemen, what are the organizations who are vying in this general elections philosophy? Do we know what that is or what they are?
I would say
go first.
Yes. I would ask, do they know what their philosophy is?
No, don't worry about that. We want to know. We, the people, want to know because this show today is for the people, and we want to help the people understand what is what. And so we want to know what the people know. So if you know, then that means the people should know. And if they don't know, they'll know by the end of the night.
Well, if I could take a stab at that question, I think it's a very good question. But truth be told, if you were to look at the political spectrum, talking serious political science here, and you think about the left wing and the right wing and the center, the two main, what I would call legacy parties, the PLP and FNM, have historically been basically in the center. You could make a case that the PLP is left of center, maybe the FNM is slightly right of center. PLP left of center because the PLP generally spends more money on social services and programs, and also supports in some degree state-owned operations, institutions, and stuff like that. That's going back to the 1980s. At one point, the PLP had its fingers in even hotel management on Cable Beach, etc. And of course, the utilities at one point was state-controlled as well. So that's sort of how we could say they were more left of center than the FNM. We know the FNM, when they came into power in '92, was all about privatizing and opening the airwaves. They took out an approach of sort of a laissez-faire, freeing themselves of government intervention in private enterprise, etc. But ideologically, other than that, really the two main parties are still very close. And a lot of people critically and understandably say, they're two sides of the same coin because they really land philosophically at the same point on that political spectrum. The only real left-leaning party we've ever had was the Vanguard Party, which was defunct by 1987. Okay, with John McCartney leading that party, people like Wallace and Lionel Carey and Charles Fox. Now, looking at what we have in the political landscape today, I was not shocked or even surprised that when they had the open parliament a few weeks ago, those what we would call third parties lined up one after the other. And they all sounded the same pretty much to me. The rhetoric was, anti-PLP, anti-FNM, yes. Diversify the economy, yes. Move away from tourism model, yes. But, in terms of the nuts and bolts, what is your actual philosophical undergirding? What is it that your party stands for that sets you apart from another? I didn't hear that from any of these third parties. You could make a case that the DNA is more right-wing because of its position on immigration than some of the other third parties. I would argue that the COI appears to be trying to go even further right than the DNA.
Okay.
But it's hard to separate some of these parties on philosophy. And maybe that's why there's a hesitancy on our part to answer the question. Really, in our political culture, we don't talk about philosophy and ideology. Our politics is about personality, not policy.
But we get
so that's what it boils down to.
The younger people are pushing us that way, and so and this show is designed primarily to focus towards the young people and so forth. So that's why I asked the question. So CC Allen dropped off. Hopefully, is able to come back on. But the other one would be is the vision, mission, values, and behaviors. And we have Mr. James R. Lucas, who taught me once in a course when I used to travel a lot for BTC back then in the day. And he said that the average or mediocre leader ignores the importance of these cultural drivers or dismiss them as trivial, soft, or touchy-feely. And so the question I have on the table would be is that, are they clearly defined in these organizations? What is their mission, their vision, their values, and the behaviors that they subscribe to?
Again, this is really problematic because we have a snap election and we got a plan for a new day from the PLP. And then it took another week or so for the FNM to come out with a manifesto. And I've looked at both documents in detail. And we're not so sure if there is a mission, a vision statement, objectives kind of scenario. We know that both of them have some kind of a plan, but it's not really well articulated. And it came very late in the game. Again, this is stuff that you should have had out months and months ago.
Right. So, Alan, did you hear the question?
Yes. Let me apologize. No, I did not. Let me apologize. Oh, we just had a New Providence experience, and my generator didn't kick in.
Don't put that on New Providence now. Grandmama's supposed to be the first city. Yeah.
I know, that's what I'm saying. This is the second blackout I experienced for the month. This is what I thought. It must have been a total of 6 minutes by now.
Yeah. Okay. So the questions that we had on the table was the second one would have been the vision, mission, values, and behaviors, and then whether the parties today have clearly defined those things for the public, for the voter, electorate. Yeah.
I didn't hear Dr. Curry's response, but I would say to you that essentially political parties, the two legacy parties, as you call it, I think their mission, their vision has been blurred to the point that I think very few of them can actually define it.
Oh.
And I think the mission of the FNM is continue to be one of privatization, strengthening of businesses, and the Progressive Liberal Party is still focused towards what they define as the grassroots and underprivileged. What's the third one you asked? Mission, vision, and
the vision, mission, values, and behaviors.
Well, I think the values part is that's very hard for me to define as to what do they hold dear. You know, we have because both of them have become so blurred. In fact, I would say using Dr. Curry's definition, I'd say they become so much close to the center that it's hard to determine where either of them are, and that's why it seems almost like MPs are interchangeable between them, except you got to use colors to designate them.
Yeah. Well, the PLP has written ones, which was from 1953. Now, whether they following them to the T or not is another story. And I guess if you said that about values, then we might as well don't even mention behaviors. But these are the 4 items that James R. Lucas talks about, who is a consultant who would have done some courses that I would have been involved in some multiple years ago, and so forth. And so the next subject we want to talk about is the leadership. And we talk about the leader, the deputy, and the chairman. I see those as the critical pivot points within each of these organizations. And so we asked the question from Dr. Lucas. Well, I don't remember if he was doctor again, but anyway, he said, great leaders understand that there is no greater source of power for building a passionate, high-performance organization, in our case, the country, than they drain the building, and they drain these drivers of every ounce of potential. Do we see our leaders, deputies, and chairmen doing that in their organizations in terms of these? And see, Alan, I don't know if you heard the first part, which was average or mediocre leaders ignore the importance of these cultural drivers or dismiss them as trivial, soft, or touchy-feely. And so those 2 statements are critical to his whole training that he did on leadership and the like.
Let me just speak, having been at the founding of almost every party in the Bahamas since 2003. First of all, I think having been in many of them, a lot of them do not understand organizational structure beyond the leader is one that dictates as opposed to inspires. Let me use an example. When, as part of being part of a political party and eventually as leader of one, we set the party, at least in the ones I always said the trend is this. The leader of the party is the CEO of the board. The deputy leader is the co-chairman of the board, but the chairman of the party is the president of the organization, and he runs and he's supposed to run and drive it. And the CEO determines the vision, and the co-CEO sits there. But essentially, what we have is leadership in the Bahamas, where as soon as you become leader, you become a benevolent dictator. And even when the constitution of the parties, where I've been part of parties where we've created the constitution to stop what we call the mimicking of the 2 legacy parties, but as we have a leader that becomes part of it, becomes one of these so-called alternate parties, they take on the behavior of the very organizations they say they want to replace. And I don't think we've had any real strong civics on organizational structure, on political structure, intent and purpose, and leadership as one of inspiration, as opposed to dictatorial. I am finally the leader. You'll do as I say until I am no longer the leader.
Yeah, that's a colonial thing. Dr. Curry?
That's a great response. I just want to add a little regional texture to that. In the region, the Caribbean and Latin America included, there's always been these populist leaders that have come to the fray every so often, and they appeal to apparently grassroots in their rhetoric, agrarian reform, institutional reform, educational reform. It sounds great, but oftentimes when they actually get in power, and they wield power, they morph into a totalitarian dictator. And so you see the paradox of populist totalitarianism in figures like Rafael Trujillo in the Dominican Republic in the 1930s, Papa Doc Duvalier in Haiti in the 1950s and 60s, and then his son Jean-Claude Duvalier up until 1985. Mm-hmm. But in the Bahamas, we have the populist figure in people like Pinling, and even someone like Cecil Wallace Whitfield. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what always happens is, I agree completely with C. Allen, is when they actually get into that office and hold executive reins of government, they turn into a indispensable leader. They get the operational guidelines that have them making all the decisions for everyone. And to the point where, the executive position in our country, although constitutionally it's supposed to have some checks and balances and all of that, because of the way in which positions are appointed by the leader, whether it be cabinet, whether it be justices, whether it be board appointments, we now have created an executive position, and it's actually evolved to the point where it almost naturally promotes a totalitarian dictator. And we've seen it increasingly in their personalities that have emerged, particularly with this last one, the current prime minister, who apparently doesn't take advice well and ignores even members in his cabinet, turns his back on media, and has a degree of arrogance and aloofness when dealing with issues. So all of those are not good optics, particularly for a country that espouses democratic principles in our constitution, right?
Mm-hmm. So I to add a little piece to that, I think what happens is people get into an environment that they're not comfortable with, so they revert to what is their foundation. And all of the leaders that we have had up to date, including those who are running today, are all from the colonial or before era of colonial system of leadership. And so that's why they revert to that, which is that the kingdom type leader. I'm the king, I will do this. You must the subject, you go do whatever, right?
Yeah, I think one would expect it of more so of this particular leader having the views that he espoused. I thought that he had a blended type environment of the last 15 years to observe what is expected of a new generation of thought, and he actually came in gangbang on those ideals. In fact, if you used to go and read the 2017 FNM manifesto, it'll be very hard if you used to put it in yellow to know it was not the Progressive Liberal Party. And so it was a blended type environment for which he somehow seemingly abandoned once he got the power. And many around him who before and now says that it's almost as if to an arrogance of ignorance dome sets up around them. And it doesn't matter what the expert says. It doesn't matter what anyone says. It's what I say, as is, where is, until now where's the people choice. And you say you come back now and take the position of, I want to listen to you this time, that type of environment. And this is what we've had every 5 years. And it's almost as though they're oblivious to their behavior for 4+ years.
Yeah, there's a saying, I think is Abraham Lincoln, who says that the philosophy of the schoolroom today will be the philosophy of governance tomorrow. Well, we've never flipped over and allowed the schoolroom philosophy to change. It's always been the same for the last 20, 40 years. So I think when we get beyond that, then we're going to start seeing the change that we were looking for, right? So another big part of leadership is defining or understanding what is reality. Do we do that well? The leaders that have been in the debates and the like, and whoever else who's been out there, do they really define what is reality. I know Dr. Curry, you all put a lot of questions to them, and some of the questions, I wondered if they really listened to what was being asked, because it didn't seem like they were answering what you all asked.
We struggled as a committee, a debate committee, because we found that a lot of the debaters from the first to the second were ill prepared. They looked like they didn't come prepared. They didn't do any research. They seemed rather lost. They gave vague responses. They gave responses that weren't actually applicable to the question that was asked. They danced around the question. So I laugh, but in truth, that's what we get that all the time. Everywhere you go, when you ask a politician a question, they do a lot of dancing. And even now, our current prime minister seems to want to dance when he gets on stage at his motorcades. But that's beside the point. The real issue is we don't have people who take seriously the really big questions that are before us. And the big question is, you're in a campaign at the height of the worst wave of a pandemic with a virulent Delta virus version of COVID-19 that is wreaking havoc on our country, right? But instead of talking about those kind of realities and austerity measures that really need to be put in place post-election as it relates to the economy, you hear in both parties, legacy parties and others. I was listening to Lincoln Bain earlier today, and the kind of pie in the sky, pipe dream promises that these parties are making, it is so unrealistic. Like, you realize they're inheriting a $13.4 billion debt. You know what I mean? Like, and your cupboards are bare. There's nothing left. So, I mean, we're not finding realistic conversations about the Bahamas as we see it right now.
And he's absolutely correct. When I hear these governments talk now, it's almost as if though they start to count from the dollar sign and ignore the negative to the left of it, and they just look at all of this money we got to spend, and I go, how, what, where, and how are you going to execute it? Where are you going to get the funding? And when I listen to the political parties right now, very few of them are putting forth ideas for growth. I'm fascinated by. For one who has been utilizing these terms for almost a decade, I'm just fascinated by the adoption of these terms, blue and green and orange and knowledge and conceptual and digital and small d, big D, circular economy. I've been listening to see if any of them properly define it. I think the best they came in any definition was the orange economy, but when you go to the others, it's scary, because what happens is, again, comes that level of arrogance, because what happens is once they get elected, you can't add anything or correct them or critique them, because then it becomes an insulting. Oh, you think you know everything? I now know I got the position. Oh, you should, if you think you knew, you should have been elected. That type of positioning, when technically the collective intelligence of all of us will always be superior to just some of us. And that's the part that leadership in this country don't seem to understand. And so I call it the political silos begin to go up as soon as the day after the election the results are announced.
Well, part of that is a lack of experience and exposure, right? Why they do those things. And so when we look at that, but before I ask the next question, though, being a creative myself, I don't believe that $13 billion debt is a challenge for what we have. It might be a medium challenge, but it's not a long-term challenge, because I see $100 billion revenue from the Bahamas if we were to do things and engage, like C. Allen just said, the creatives and the likes who can innovate. And so we could raise as a whole, the collective as a whole can do certain things. I think we would be best on if we do that.
If I could squeeze a point in, I am also sold on the orange economy, only because I'm a historian. I see the value of heritage sites across the length and breadth of the archipelago. But again, the big if is, how do we actually harness the potential that we have with our heritage sites? I've been pitching that for so long, but a lot of my ideas, like C. Allen, you probably get frustrated. A lot of my ideas have been filed under forget. I will tell you now, years ago, this going back 5-6 years ago, I actually drafted a a proposal for a National Heroes Park at Clifton. I had 4 quadrants. I'd actually been to Jamaica and I looked at their National Heroes Park. I was inspired by it. And I came up with a proposal, man. I don't know what them people did with that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we could fix that going forward, and so forth. So the other question I have on that same line would be execution capacity. We have, in my view, mastered politics, which from the point of view, as we call it, politics in the Bahamas, which is winning elections. We mastered how to market and how to, like we say on the street, swing people and what have you. But when it comes down to the second half of what the person's supposed to do, which is for the length of the period, which is the 5 years versus the couple of months of leading up to the election, is governance. And we seem to struggle with an execution capacity once we get in governance. Have these parties conveyed that they have the capacity to execute?
I think, let me say, I haven't worked, let me tell you something. Dr. Curry, after coming home almost 20 years now, after being in the business almost like 30 years, 35 years in technology, seeing it birth, I came home so excited knowing that the Bahamas were one of the most digitally prepared. In 2001, they were trying to bring the 10th largest data center in the world into the Bahamas, but we refused to pass the laws to allow it in. So I came home in 2001, 2003, come home excited, saying, okay, good, I'll educate them and we'll be able to have it. Oh yeah. They had hammers and things that they was like, how dare you? See, I used to express it, sorry, the alligator cave where I came back out of the sunlight and they beat me, telling me the sun basically drove me mad. And so, because I came and says, no, the trees are not gray, it's just green and red, and they say, you see. So what I'm simply saying is that we have the capacity. The problem is it doesn't necessarily lie inside of our elected officials, and many of them have yet to realize what leaders do. Leaders inspires and delegates others to do things, and then they take the credit and then they pass the blame. These individuals I've found is like, tell me your 15 years experience in 10 minutes so I can now go and tell everybody what to do. And because they want to say, I'm the one elected, I want to be the one do it, I want to be the one saying it. And they don't even look at the titans now today, where I remember when I was in the lab with Bill Gates, I don't think he even knew where a lab in his institution is now. But yet in 2 decades, he has managed to inspire and motivate individuals to build a multi-billion trillion dollar empire. And so with the individual, with government, if leadership in our country would realize that the intelligence don't have to 100% flow through them, but if they could just manage the collection of people who can execute, we can bring about the change that is necessary. But we have this addiction of, it has to be me. I have to be the one in the front of the camera. I have to want to speak. Let's ask an example. Very few people in the Bahamas today, it has happened so long, knows that the PS runs the ministries.
Yep. And they protect it actually by law from the policymakers, but whether that practice is another story, right?
Yeah, my take on this too is we haven't seen from any of these parties like an actionable, first 100 days in office kind of scenario, what we'll be doing. Not laying out the bricks and mortar of details of how you can actually actionable these items that I see in the manifesto and the plans, all these. To me, a lot of them are very vague. The details is not there. But I would also say, this is a problem with leadership in that we have, like I mentioned earlier, the indispensable leader. What we don't have is the consensus building leader, the person who actually is interested in empowering others and bringing out the best in others, and listening to their advice and seeing how those ideas could be actionable in a way that benefits others. What we get is a small group of people who may advise the PM, and they may not be cabinet ministers. And even the cabinet ministers think of themselves as ordained by God, it seems, to rule over their fiefdom, which is their cabinet portfolio. And so they don't rarely take even the advice of their PSs, who really are the experts, the people who are the professionals with the degrees, who have been in that area of work or a line of work for decades. That's their career. But there's so much disconnectedness in our political system from the permanent secretaries and the civil servants through to the cabinet, and the cabinet is just trying to get the favors of the crumbs of the prime minister. Right. And all of that speaks to a hierarchical system that is extremely top down. Whereas the better model of governance from my vantage point is a consensus building, organically grown democratic system. And I'm thinking particularly of one of my favorite civil rights activists was a woman named Ella Baker. You may not know too much about her, but she was involved in SNCC, Southern Leadership Christian Conference, as well as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She was involved in the NAACP. She went across a whole bunch of different organizations in the U.S. But in every place that she went, she spent all of her time taking notes and listening to what people had to say. All right. In other words, she really built an entire civil rights career on consensus building. And we don't have that model in the Bahamas that we run with. We always go with a top-down authoritarian figure, and you just basically telling me what I need to do. Yeah,
well, the Finland administration started that way, and then it went astray in time, right? That's consensus. See, Alan, any comments on that before I go to the?
No, I would agree with Dr. Curry. Having advised most of the third-party advisors, it is where they don't even want you to speak to their board or their executive. Tell me, and I will go and tell the people or tell my followers. And so if you look at many of the alternate parties, if you ask them what did their party believe, they'll tell you it's this one. You know, it's the example they say, well, Lincoln Bain says, well, Arinthia says, well, Ali McIntosh says, well, whatever. So, and that's basically what the party becomes, what they say. And then the day after the election is whatever the new leader elected now becomes what they says. Yeah, and so that's a consensus, you know, and so the problem is that, and I think there's an opportunity now with this shift in demographics of this 60+% of the new youth shift for a alternate party over the next 5 years to actually move into an education advocacy type environment, to not one where you're seeking to confront the party, but act as government and weighing the proper definition of our position.
Right. So we can touch on that a little bit more after the break. But before we do that, we get two more questions, and then. But Loretta Butler Turner, who aspired to be leader of one of the political parties here, posts here that the leaders in the country are generally not secure enough to reach across the divides to harness and utilize best minds. And coming out of the telecom arena, I see it happening throughout in the telecoms arena, but when you get out of the arena, it doesn't happen. I don't see it. And maybe because they don't understand telecoms that they have to come to us when we were in there, but so forth and such. And then she has a follow-up here. So until we truly believe that our human resources, I call it human capital, is our greatest asset, which is true. But that goes again to our colonial thinking and our people who are trained colonially who are leading or in positions of leadership. When we start to evolve some of those people around, then the other philosophies will start to kick in. Go ahead and see Alan before we.
The statement that she makes, if you look at those 6 or 7 models that they speak of, none of them functions without the people. None of them, and that's the problem when I hear political parties talk about all these things the green do, the blue do, the orange do, and the knowledge and the conceptual and digital. None of those function without the human capital. And one of the things is when you hear them talk about doing all of these things, they talk about almost as if though you just sprinkle this magic green color and they're now in the green economy and the development of the people. And that's the part, you know, education and transformation is one of the greatest part of educational transformation, one of the greatest assets we have. And believe it or not, if we are to turn this economy around, that's the most primary goal. Is going to be our pre-K through tertiary education. That should be foremost and focused, because as it said, the IDB and others have said, we are about a decade behind in technologically as the world is, and COVID has accelerated the world at about a year per month. And so we have some catching up to do, and education must be primary. I think, in fact, I would put to you that education is going to be the primary position who's going to decide the direction this country goes going forward as of the 17th.
So, as an educator, I'd like to chime in on that as well. I think that human capital or human resource is always a country's greatest resource, greatest asset. But we have undersold that concept, that principle at so many levels for so long. I believe to actualize that principle, you have to have universal free education from kindergarten to university across the entire archipelago. I also believe to make that mean something, we have to have more grants, more bursaries, more scholarships available to more people. We also understand that we have an archipelagic nation, right? We're actually the largest Atlantic world archipelago. But we have differentiated learning, unequal education across the archipelago. We have to, through the digital economy and through virtual education, and we need to get the technology so that you person studying in a school in Ragged Island should not be disadvantaged from the fact that they are living in Ragged Island. There should be the same equity in education, depending on not required or not because of the island that you live on, whether it be Mayaguana, and I'm picking Mayaguana and Rumkey and Ragged Island because those are considered the remote islands. But you should have the same quality of education regardless of where you are in the archipelago. But we haven't gotten there. We have not gotten there.
Well, technology we
can solve it
today.
Yeah. Do you remember the voice of the customer that BTC used to do when we were going around the islands promoting the Bahamas domestic submarine cable? All of that was put in place in order to do exactly what you just explained, and then it just got the pause button put on it. So the ability to govern, have the parties demonstrated that they have that ability. Now, granted, people will say, well, they never had a chance in governance, but the ability to govern and being in governance doesn't necessarily have to be the same, because you could govern many places and so forth. But do they demonstrate or do they share any information to say that they can actually govern?
Well, one of the things, the question you asked requires, that's a hindsight question. And where an individual have to apply themselves, and maybe in real time you get to see the errors, but you can't really tell if this, whether it's a recoverable error until it actually fails. And so I would say in our past governance has shown that we have been playing hit or miss, and when we actually miss, we move into lyrical gymnastic or linguistic contortionism as an explanation as to what exactly it is that we have. We say, don't believe what you see or heard, except what I tell you. And that's where the argument is. Now, one of the problems is to make a determination of good governance is something we don't have. Freedom of information, transparency. You can't tell what has been good because, again, you can't tell the impact or the effectiveness without all the data. And as a data person, I'll tell you, one of my greatest feats is trying to figure out this government.
Yeah, I concur. I think data analytics is the way to go forward, because you have to have, first of all, benchmarks, and then you have to be able to determine to what extent that you meet the benchmarks that you've established. The only way to do that is through the data that you might do to determine the success of the product or the initiative or the policy that you enacted. But we don't do science that well here. Eh? We don't even know, because we don't even have a Freedom of Information Act. We don't have a Finance Campaign Reform Act. We don't have a Independent Boundaries Commission Act. We don't have a Fixed Election Date Act. There are so many legislative changes that we need in this country in order to have good governance, in order to then establish benchmarks, in order to then determine whether we met the benchmarks through the data analytics process. And we have not gotten there. We're so far behind in that area. It's just unfathomable, really.
But but when you look back to, let's go back to 2017. This is where, for me, and I would say this administration dropped the ball. Now, if you go back to what was promised then, and then they had a lot of young people bought into this. it was transparency, accountability, integrity, anti-corruption, freedom of information, term limits, boundaries commission, so many different things. It was literally a smorgasbord of what the people wanted.
Right.
And we have not gotten, I don't think we've gotten a single one. And this is where I think beginning on the 17th is where the people, the Bahamian people, can have to take a more active involvement in the governance so that they can have these things done. Because what happens is in our governance, when you allow the leadership to sink into, or you say, fought themselves in, almost like you build their fort, that's it for 4 to 5 years. And I think so what we have to do is on day one, move into a demand for the things that we want, in spite of what they told us they will be giving us.
And one of the things is that after you do a lot of things, then we call dissolve the house, and so then a lot of stuff that has not been enacted just falls away. So you got to start those pretty much all over again. Yeah. So when we talk about these strong leaders now, I was taught that every organization takes on the personality of its most dominant leaders, and so I think we could tell based on the party's dominant leaders, what will the personality of those parties be in governance? So tell us now, before we go to the break, how or who leads in the effective marketing of themselves as leaders today of the parties?
Let me start with the current government. I would say the current government is trying to reform. It came in, that leader came in as one that was looking to embrace, reach across borders, the new generation mindset. Then they locked into this total, it actually became a dictatorship. And I think what is happening now is what you have is an attempt to rebrand or to more like blame everybody else but themselves. Then you have the DNA with it's more of a feminine, it's a woman's time, and I have a parliament being a woman rather than saying, are you the woman, in that type of environment. And then you have the Progressive Labour Party with Mr. Brave Davis, who is basically coming in as seemed to be trying to brand himself as a listener consensus type of person that will reach across boundaries and marketing himself as that. Lincoln Bain is one where he's saying that we got to burn down the house and build a new one. That because they just want us infested, and then you have the other parties basically is almost non-issues because they themselves are trying to find identity in themselves. So when you have the two major party, I think the FNM has abandoned the new leadership. This current leadership has abandoned trying to reshape himself as someone that maybe was challenged and can still continue, and basically just taking on the position of that guy can be worse than me, as opposed to having a conversation on what is it that you could have done and want to continue, and these are the reasons why you should be allowed to. And so you have a consensus builder and one of saying, he don't listen to what he said about a consensus. I know who he is. And so we're not having that real dialogue of I would say intelligence, ideas being hashed out against each other to see who's best to go forward. So it's a tragedy that you have to make a decision based on emotionalism as opposed to intellect.
Yeah. If I could just add a little bit from my perspective, the way that different leaders of these parties are trying to brand themselves, I think that Minnis has completely disregarded the earlier attempts that he made in 2017 to brand himself as like a people's leader, a popular leader. I think he's banking on his appeal to a certain segment of the population that like the brash and arrogant kind of leader that we have seen before, in the same veins of, I guess, a Hugh Biggity kind of, but even bigger than a Biggity, right? And that's the persona that he has. If you see him out on the campaign trails, it's almost like a one-man show, to be honest. We're not even sure what the other candidates in his party look like. They're so diminished because he's so prominent everywhere he goes. He's like the indispensable leader. He has to be at every show. I think that Brave is trying a different approach. I agree with CL, and he is trying to sell himself as a consensus building leader. You see more profiles about his candidates. You see more diversity in his approach, and he focuses more on the plan that he seems to have in place. But of course, we don't know what that's going to. If the PLP wins, the big if, will he then transition to being the authoritarian dictator that so many politicians before him have felt for the die? You know, they've gone and reverted to something that they didn't say they were going to be. Mm-hmm. And so that is the big. Akumalafi, I think the DNA is cannibalized. I think there's been so much internal fissures in that party that she's trying to almost having to fight off people. And so she's coming at it almost from a defensive posture. And I think her party's been weakened by the internal dissent. That's my feeling. Cassius Stewart, he seems like someone who's been around for a long time. I remember him when he was first starting out, like in 1998, 99, 2000 with the BDM then. That coalition is fragmented from the start. Because it was just barely formed when we went to nomination day. But he seems to have some gravitas, something about him that people like. Because remember in that same room when they had that closed session, he got the leadership over Lincoln.
Yes, he did.
Over Ali McIntosh. All right. And so people see in him as a thinker. I think he actually is a really smart guy. And he has got some really bright ideas about the economy. And I know he's also a published author. So I think, again, a lot of this falls on personality and what's being projected. But I really think that what people project and brand in the election campaign and what they actually deliver when they get elected, two totally different things.
Oh, at least it has been. It has been for in our
period. Yeah. So we're going to take the break now. And when we come back, we're going to touch on parts where we drill into some of the landscape as to what might be the outcome and the like as we move forward. So you've been listening to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. We're here with Professor Curry and data analyst Johnson, and we're discussing the subject as to how we can move our country forward, improving our leadership, and the like, and then what would be the way forward thereafter, where we go from here. So we'll be right back after these few messages.
Sammy's Chicken. There's nothing like it.
ID Star, God of 242 Elite, and I just want to tell y'all all about a great experience crossing Orlando this past month. We had some fundraisers. We want to thank everyone for reaching out to us. We want to send a special thank you to our coach D, Denzel Knowles. He really did well taking care of us and looking after us for the past month. Everything that we did, it was awesome. We had really great experience. We played plenty games, man. Like, we really played a lot of games. We had some scrimmages in there. Felt like I was in school. We wake up every morning for mobility. Right after that, we probably go do some ball handling. If not, we have game right after. He's putting in but 2-3 games a day. I'm telling you, we play him about 3 to 4 times a week. It was a really great experience. It was well worth it. And I really hope that we continue the ball. I just want to ask anyone that's out there in Freeport or probably just in the Bahamas, still in school, trying to play ball, build on your skill. D1 Development is a really great program. Y'all should try and get out at it. But 242 Elite is a really great traveling program.
Welcome back to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knows. We're here this evening having a sort of under the tree roundtable discussion with Dr. Chris Curry and C. Allen Johnson about the best campaigns for what the people want. Who are the persons whose campaigns are matching what the people out there want? Somebody to drive their country towards. And so before the break, we talked a lot about leadership and the form and structure and the like. And so now we want to shift gears a little bit and start talking about what could be. And so I will ask Curry and Johnson that, are we ready to get ourselves out of COVID? Are we ready to innovate to get ourselves out? Whoever becomes the government, would they be ready to do that?
Well, I think there are a few things that would need to happen, and I'm a big fan of science and, of course, the empirical data that has to drive our decision-making on COVID, which I think this current administration has pretty much ignored. I think we need to have more testing. I think the testing needs to be free. I think you need to have community spread monitored. We haven't done a really good job at all of testing and contact tracing and all of that. We might have started it at the beginning, but I think that's been completely thrown to the wayside. That community spread is a serious thing. I also know that our numbers are deflated. The numbers that we have, even the more recent ones that came out today that said things have dropped dramatically. I think you have to look at longitudinal studies and science to determine what patterns are actually established. I think also vaccination programs are really good, but you know what we've had missing, absent completely, is an educational campaign that needs to be launched. You need to have Zoom webinars, town hall meetings of sorts, to really get behind the science of all of this. Because, you know, we're a country, we have people who believe almost anything. I hate to say it like that, but the truth is there's a lot of different ideas out there about COVID, but there's very little education spearheaded by the government. People are getting stuff from Facebook, social media, and that's gospel truth for them. And so I hope that the next administration, whether it be FNM, PLP, whatever color it may be, DNA, COI, whatever, they need to be driven by data analytics, empirical science, and more than anything, advice from medical professions who know the business. They know what they're doing. But I definitely believe that community spread and doing the testing and making testing free, and then the community tracing, calling, and the quarantining, all that has to be really rigorously enforced.
Yeah. So part of that is that besides collecting the data, because, you know, Drucker said that, you know, you can't manage what you don't measure. But besides collecting it, we also actually need to put meaning to the data, C. Allen, because, you know, that is a critical part of what we do in the data field. Those of us who tinker with it. And you are an expert at it. Yeah.
Let me just say on that part, we said you can't manage what you can't measure. The part of that says you can't measure what you refuse to acknowledge. And so, so that and that is the problem that we've had with currently. I have yet from day one, I've asked for the data, and what we have is reports. And people confuse a report is not data. It is not. And so he says, here's what the report says, here's what the report says. And I says, where did you get that report from? That's what I want to see. I want to see I want to see the lake or the data warehouse that you got this from, so that we can look at it. And there is none from the time the COVID happened. I would say to you that if we were using data sets, we would have had this under management. 400,000 individuals or 250,000 adults is not a lot of individuals to manage and to track. More so on Grand Bahama, with less than 50,000 and the other smaller islands, those are what I would give our first-year college students complete autonomy to create the data sets to track and do those individuals and find out those community spreads. So when you come to Grand Bahama and New Providence, Grand Bahama is extremely segmented. That gives you an ideal type of environment for data sets and data tracking for testing, because what we have is we have family communities, of communities of families on these old islands. And so you could very easily find out who, what, when, and because we have a set scheduling and where to go, we don't have the commingling that you have with New Providence. But even for New Providence, when you look at, if you break it down into zones and know where the person is, know where they went, know where they are, punch those into the data set. You don't even rely on your memory. And when you begin to cross-reference data with multiple individuals, then you begin to see where individuals cross each other apart, and you can begin to isolate that. Because even if you use the analytics of COVID, 5 people infecting 5 people is 25, then 5 more is 125, and 625, 3125, 15,000 individuals could be exposed in a matter of 14 days just from 5 individuals that had COVID that has free reign of it. Now, whether those people come down with COVID or something else, then we have the whole aspect of what they call, you don't show symptom, asymptomatic, who then now pass on to another set of asymptomatic. And so we could have pinpointed this more so when you can look at the second phase when we had the break before Delta variant entered the picture. I would say to you, and I'm afraid, considering political bias, I'm afraid that if the Free National Movement is reelected, it will authenticate their behavior as opposed to moving to a science-based type environment. Because
so are any of these parties though ready to do what you're describing? Because I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head as to what we need to do, but we really need to ask
in the pure,
they got to know that they need to do it.
In the purest sense, I don't think they are prepared from an internal aspect. I don't know. And see, this is where the question becomes: do we have the capability, or can get the capability, and leadership has prevented us so far? So the question then becomes: will a new leader, or even this leader, admit that what they have done did not work, and what we need to do is something different? And that's the question we have to ask. And so, the position that this leadership have taken somewhat tells me, and I don't just, and excuse me for being a little biased in this, I don't just take it very specifically for COVID. I take it for the fact that whenever it comes to technology for the last 4 years, this administration has manufactured consent as opposed to actually doing it. And so if you continuously manufacture the consent or market the consent as opposed to actually doing it, you will have a problem. And you can, this is not me, you can see where the Prime Minister says one thing, which is separate from the Minister of Health, which is separate from the doctors, which is separate from the nurses. And so it's as though everybody has their own data set, their own experiences that they are having. And that's not science-based, but it's also be put into what is called a data lake for us to basically crunch and see what is happening. And so my question then becomes is there another leader that is willing to not lean to their own understanding and actually have the computer do the work and take the credit, and then they take the credit?
Well, at least they could watch the show, and if they didn't know what to do, now they know, right? And so they could get the information. So there's a environment that I coined on a previous show, and I continue to carry on as to what we need to get to as a result of the COVID shutdown, for lack of a better term, reset, whatever you want to call it. It's called the new built environment. And this is what I'm suggesting that the people of the Bahamas have been begging for a number of years now, more than 10 years, to get to this new built environment where we have the political, economic, social environment of the society formulated through intentional thought and action designed to create the greatest opportunity to build the highest quality of life for the citizens, residents, and those subscribing to and supporting the culture of the 242, and for it to be sustainable for generations to come. Are they ready to do that? Because we don't want a new normal, which is just going to be a continuation of where everything falls into play, and then whoever has the power end up winning everything. But we want an intentional direction steering economy where the people as a whole, the majority of the people as a whole, can get access to benefit from. Are we heading in that direction?
I'm not sure we are. I will say this: the current government had every opportunity to take seriously the idea of diversifying the economy during COVID, when the entire tourism and banking, to an extent, industries were shut down. We could have revisited a different plan, not named Stafford Sands model of development, but we didn't. In fact, what the government did was they doubled down on the Stafford Sands model. As soon as they had a chance, they opened up the borders without really having a protocol plan in place, leading to the second wave, as we know. That was last summer. And then on top of that, once they got things, the wheels of the economy rolling again, they decided to double down on tourism and mega resorts and FDI. They were praising and lauding home porting, which I believe was another super spreader right there, because now you have cruise ship passengers home porting in the Bahamas, crowding airports, crowding terminals, you name it. And again, this is banking again on that model of development based on FDI, foreign direct investment into mega resorts, into cruise ship passengers and cruise ships in general coming into the Bahamas. What we didn't see was a plan to do with microeconomies, boutique resorts owned and operated by Bahamians, expanding heritage opportunities and sites. We didn't see anything about the green economy or light manufacturing. We didn't see anything about the digital economy coming out of that moment when the economy was shut down, when the hotels were shut down.
Right.
Now, speaking to the PLP's plan, I've looked at it. One thing that they have created was a domestic investment board. And it sounds a little catchy because it sounds like, the old tourism development board, but with a new name, domestic, next to it. But I think they're trying to create the idea of investing in Bahamian entrepreneurs in tourism. But again, a lot of this is just ideas that don't have the nuts and bolts attached to them. So I am not confident this moment to see that come September 17th, we have a plan to actually revolutionize the economy and change our whole paradigm of thinking about how we do business in this country. I love your idea, right? But, it has to be more than an idea. It has to be actionable.
And this is where I love, for instance, and quite frankly, for me, the F&M current plan is simply where they say they will do what they didn't get to do, just better this time. And so it goes back, but again, they took the strength of their previous plan, they left out the freedom of information, transparency, accountability. They took all of these, the buy-ins. The PLP plan, I see, came in with about at least 4 or 5 of the 7 different economic models. And again, these are wonderful ideas when you begin to look at them in microeconomic type environment. I saw where the F&M picked up, and I saw the debate where you have a Bahamas Invest Bahamas, and I thought it was somewhat disingenuous because in 2014, Perry Christie came with the Invest Bahamas idea. You could just go to Twitter and other places and see. And so basically this is just building off, and then because the F&M took possession of the Invest Bahamas, I guess the PLP just flipped it now and says it's Bahamas Invest. But essentially it has great potential if you begin to recognize that you cannot have any of these economic models in isolation. And so when we begin to look at, say, the orange economy, the orange economy must come as being blended with the digital and with the knowledge economy. Because the knowledge economy is where we capture that cultural heritage type environment and blend it into in the orange economy, but in the knowledge economy. Then what happens is, so when you begin to look at all of these models, we have a way of separating them. And I think, for instance, there's a young lady that I work with in doing our debates, and when we were in the concept of trying to formulate a platform for the party that we had, she came up with the idea of saying, hey, when you begin to speak about how these blended, why don't the Bahamas own something called an aquamarine economy, which doesn't exist in the world, which then becomes a blended of all 6 of the different models. And she came up with this super model that she's still working on the white paper on. But what it does is that when we begin to recognize that each one of these have its own capital, and the Bahamas itself has tremendous value. Just for instance, if you look at the tourism data set is a multi-billion-dollar data set that we have yet to tap into, that we can bleed into the orange economy. We can build into what is called the built economy that you speak about. And we talk about this tourism model. First of all, we need to get up. We need to understand that tourism is what people do, hospitality what people experience. And so we have to move to what is called hospitality, where we say we leave science model alone of tourism, embrace hospitality, the 10th largest industry in the world. That's where you have the sports tourism. Notice you have hospitality, there's sports tourism, medical tourism, educational tourism, all of these different type things that comes what people do under the brand of hospitality, what people experience. And so when you begin to add the digitization of that, the cultural and heritage in that, and that's the orange, and then you begin to look at, we have one of the most valuable asset, I think the fourth or fifth most valuable asset in the world in our oceans, that we somehow allow cruise ships that we call floating hotels, inclusive floating hotels, to abuse and damage for their benefits. And so I think we are at a pivot where we didn't lose. We are losing the opportunity where we have spent the 18 months contemplating going back as opposed to building forward. And I think somehow from the 17th, I think the conversation has to begin. What do we do now and what do we do next without looking back? We have to learn to build forward going forward from this point on.
And so that's why I say that the $100 billion revenue stream is not out of reach. Because if you break that $100 billion down into all those different segments that you just spoke of and more, because we only touched on some of them, you can see that all of those are in reach. I mean, the shark industry, I keep mentioning this, that I'm told by my friends and former schoolmates at the UM, that the amount of people who come here just to play with the sharks and the like, that's like a $2 billion industry by itself. But we don't gain anything from it, as far as I'm told. By some of the people in the industry. And so let's shift gears a little bit now. We've already talked about what is needed or where we want to go and stuff like that. And let's see now whether we're going to be able to get there. What did the advanced polls tell us? What did we learn from that?
Well, we have to be careful if you're talking about who won. We can't tell.
No, not who won.
I was on a show last night. I actually cited the 2012 Parliamentary Act elections because it specifically says it's a violation of the Act to disclose any results. But I know what you're asking. We learned from the advance polls that they need to do a lot better with organizing the election coming up in 2 days. There was way too many people gathered in places. The lines were long. They didn't have it like A to M, N to Z, where you could have come half day for one set and the other half come the rest of the day. Things that they did for lockdown when we had to go to the grocery store. They could have implemented something like that. There was no signage. You come to the school and there's 3 different constituencies for that one school. You don't know where you're supposed to go to actually line up. I always find that frustrating when I have to line up. I want to know which line I'm supposed to be in, because if you line it up in the wrong line and you stand in for an hour and find out that you're in the wrong line, that could be really frustrating. I heard reports at Gambia, a friend that I spoke to, 4-hour wait to vote. Gambia is a very hilly area in New Providence, and the school is on the top of the hill. They had some elderly people who had to literally be pushed forward. And then there were people that were fainting and falling out because of poor hydration. It was a very hot day. And September 16th, I don't see it being any different that way. So you need signage. You need some kind of like information center. I think I saw in the material that came out yesterday from the commissioner that they in fact are going to set up concierge centers or information centers.
Okay.
They need to have, I would say they need to have in print who your presiding officer is, a picture of him or her, and know who your returning officer are, because when people have complaints and issues, they need to know who they can go to. I saw a video on YouTube where they have now a video of what to do when you get into the polling station, into the booth and all of that. And that's great. But they need to have this gazetted as well. It needs to be printed and people need to know in advance what they're getting into. So there were a lot of mistakes made at the advance polling, advance voting. I'm hoping that that's been addressed come 2 days from now.
Before you go see Alan, I can attest that I spent 3 hours at Gambia, escorting my mom and yes, we had to go up the hill. And at one point we were on the ledge. I had to tell her she had to go sit on the chair and I would just wait on the line, because if she stayed there, she might end up rolling down the hill at one point, right? Go ahead, see Alan. Yeah.
No, I would put to you that not much going to change, because there was more of a denial that anything was wrong. You heard it from the Minister of Health. You heard it from the Minister of National Security. It was almost, again, like they try to talk around the issues rather than simply listening and then going back to come up with finding the solutions. It's always, we take the position of, we have an argument of levels of failure as opposed to goals for success. And so, we wasn't as bad as the other people. Well, in Ghana, they might have had a shooter doing their thing. So at least so I don't expect much change, because essentially, again, we've had this conversation about rumors of an election for literally over a year. And so clearly, even for that process of preparation, knowing that we were in COVID for 18 months, more proactive positioning could have happened. To use an example, how many schools are open now? The Minister of Education should have known from summer that we was not going back into school. And so we could have used so many different schools. There was at least 50 schools in New Providence and 39 constituencies. And so we could have basically almost designate schools, buildings, anywhere that is totally separate, and we didn't have to combine our locations. And so I think that we fumble this. I think we started off with a good wicket of making the registry permanent. We didn't have time to purge it, and we have so much different chaos because, again, we've had individuals who move in different locations. We have, believe it or not, we have individuals who have lost homes, jobs, and rent, everything, that had to move to different locations that was not addressed. And so I anticipate that if we could not handle the 20,000, we won't be able to handle the 170,000 using the exact same space. And so it isn't like we expanded it. We said we messed up at 20,000, and we're going now in the same space with the same number of people, the same number of booths, for 6-7 times the volume of what we had before. So I anticipate that it's going to be long lines, frustrated. I'm just simply hoping that by now, I thought the parliamentary commissioner would look at extending time. I thought the competent authority would basically have lifted the 9 p.m. curfew, because if we can't get people in the booth once they're online, they have a right to vote. What you're going to do now is say, it's 6 o'clock is closed and you don't. If they're in line, they have a right to vote. Yeah. And so if you have this cascading type of effect, you are going to have some major issues that we're going to face with people being disenfranchised, and I'm anticipating somewhat chaotic. I'm somewhat glad that I'm not on New Providence, but somewhat afraid that I'm still on Grand Bahama. On the smaller islands, I envy them, because they just be like, "See, Island, it's your time to vote,"
No, but Leon, when Leon was in Grand Bahama and I was still in Nassau, we used to refer to it as the Gaza Strip and Little Beirut. So, you could take your pick which one was which, but Grand Bahama and New Providence. So I wouldn't let you throw Grand Bahama that high up the ladder like that. But
I think just as a follow up to what C. Allen was saying, I think this coming election on the 16th, you're going to have some challenges with space, no doubt. But what is also troubling is the news that the quarantine persons are now going to be able to vote. And I when I first heard it, I was overjoyed, because I believe everyone has a constitutional right to vote, and so giving people that opportunity is a good thing. But then they didn't make any provisions for a separate facility for those persons to vote. They can have them in the same line with you and me and whoever else might have tested negative and don't have COVID, and so now you're putting more strain on our population, and I see 2 days from now as a super spreader. I don't see there's any way around that.
Let's not speak that into existence, but I mean, in all
I don't want to
fairness,
speak it in existence, but I also know the reality of the fact that you have people in line. On a good day, they're not going to be following protocol and 6 feet and all of that. But now you have people who may have come in contact with people positive for COVID quarantine who are going to be on the line too.
Right, but you know,
payments are super social, and so all we have to do is form a line early. And once somebody break that, we move into our social.
Yeah.
And that's almost like
but you know, my only thing to that though, Doc, is that we don't know who have COVID now. So the people who voted in the advance poll, many of them could have been COVID thing too. So whether the person who in quarantine or not vote, it's to me it's the same thing. But I agree with you that there needs to be provisions for more screening or whatever else. Maybe not the testing, but some mechanism. I mean, there's digital technology all over to do all kinds of stuff. But you know.
Let me interject this. We don't know the possibility, but we know those who have been tested positive and those who have absolutely been exposed have a higher probability. And so what we do is we don't amplify the type of environment, because believe it or not, how many people is in quarantine and how many people have actually tested positive for COVID? We know the ones that are not going to leave the hospital to go vote. Chances are they're too people, whatever. But I'm simply saying who is at home. If we could have just taken those 5,000 or 10,000 and send them to one location. You understand?
I understand that. Yeah. So let's not dwell too much on that right now. But let's move on to this last couple of minutes, 15 minutes or so. And let's touch on this areas where we go from here. See, Alan, if I remember right, there was about 25% of the persons who were showing in many of the polls and the like as being undecided. And I think there was about 60 or 70% of the electorate eligible electorate would have been under 45. What that number actually ended up being with the truncated time to register, I don't know. I didn't follow up with that. But looking at that, we only have the choices of a landslide, a majority, a close majority, 50+1, or a true coalition where there is no majority, right? So tell us what you think will happen in this one. Which one of those three we will actually be the result?
Okay, the undecided now is closer to around 17% in the last
17?
week.
Okay.
Right now, I can tell you. Let's remove unless I'm going to be shocked. The possibility of a coalition government is somewhat nil. And let me explain what I mean. There is an institutional base of individuals that belong to the two legacy parties. And so when you begin to go into a particular area with 5,000 voters, 5,500 voters, you could very easily allocate 1,300 to 1,300 on each side, just for the sake of being balanced. So that's 2,600. So you have another 3,000 voters that's left. So the other third parties or whatever are coming in would literally have to take almost 2,000 or at least 1,800 of those 3,000 votes. They have to take more than 50% of those 3,000 votes that's left to actually be viable in any type of positioning. They have not built the institutional loyalty to any of their political party.
You're talking about the parties, the other parties, the alternate parties.
Even those individuals, because the party is just a brand, and those individuals within those constituencies would have to build that case argument for them. Hold
on right there though. Look at what I said. I said we could have a landslide. We could have a close majority, 50+1, where somebody gets over the majority, one party gets over the majority, and so they will become the government, but it's close. Or we could have a true coalition where I say there is no majority, meaning none of the parties have 50+1.
Well, that's an impossibility with our makeup of 39 seats.
I saw that, but anyway, go ahead.
If I could respond, I think we're going to have a slim majority by one party. I see it about 22-17. I don't see any independent winning. I know I get some flack for that because some people think McAlpine has a real chance. But here's the thing. The last time an independent won was in 2002. We had 4. But the 4 in question, Whitney Bastian, South Andros, Tennyson Wells, Bamboo, Pierre Depute, Shirley, and Larry Cartwright in Long Island. All those seats, they didn't have an F&M contest. So what I've been saying is, for an independent to win, there has to be some alignment of the stars where you don't have the legacy parties or one of the legacy parties not contesting. That is not happening on any island or in any constituency. Right.
But that's why I asked, Doc, that's why I asked, what is the component of people under 45? Because that holds true with people over 45, but I don't agree that that necessarily holds true for people under 45.
The other thing I want to say quickly, too, is in 2017, the PLP fielded 36.9% of the popular vote.
Okay.
So understandably, that was a landslide, but we have been flip-flopping since 1997. We haven't had an incumbent party win since 97 when Hubert Ingram was entering his second term. So that's his history is really on the side of the PLP, if you look at it like that. But the PLP has a lot to make up. Because 36.9 is a very low number. That's not to say they can't make it up, because you look at the numbers, if you do some number crunching, you can see that we have such a large swath of undecided voters. And then if you add people that may leave the F&M because they don't like minutes, there are people in the F&M who or people who might have voted F&M, but they don't like minutes, they don't like his leadership style, they don't like what the F&M promised and didn't fulfill. So you have disenchanted F&M. You could maybe add to that grouping of undecided. That might be enough then to pull the PLP ahead to win narrowly in the elections. And that's my projection. But again, a lot of things have to happen for that to occur.
And so here's what happens, Joe. We often go with this voice across the post. We have a voice across the post constituency by constituency. And oftentimes we look at the national temperature as opposed to looking at every single seat by seat. And so when you begin to look at the demographics of where those young people are, many of those young people you'll find are more geared towards the middle of New Providence and the inner cities. Because I think somehow the more affluent people where that demographics would meet that age group are the ones that went off to school that now can't come back. And there's a selling. I'm going to be very interested to see the demographics of those who don't vote to find out the impact on it. But you asked a question, I anticipate based on the data that I have that we probably had about 15,000 people who were eligible to vote, and even for young people who did not register. So in spite of us hitting 190,000, 194,000, we could estimate that it'd be more closer to 215, 217,000 individuals that is eligible. And again, this is where the failure of the third parties were, because they have not cultivated. Remind you, we had about 35,000 individuals who first time on the plate. All of those should have belonged to a third party, considering some of them claims have been around for 10 years, 11 years. And so developing relationships, developing this new concept that we're not the legacy party, but this is the vision we have. This is the party you belong to. We are the new 21st century digital, whatever else. And so I think what happens is the third parties have spent too much time saying, they actually, the third parties is basically a minor minute, basically saying, I'm not going to be as bad as them. And so saying, I'm not going to be as bad as the PLP, and the minor parties say, I'm not going to be as bad as either of those two, as opposed to putting forth their argument. And I agree, Marco Pine, when you have a voice, and I think Marco Pine may have taken a blow when Papa endorsed his candidate. That's one of the second candidates of Papa, as we call him, Hubert Alexander Ingram endorsed. Remember, Grand Bahama is F&M town. So in essence, he went and endorsed Sands, which gives them a hint like this is your new leadership. And we got to go back to December when he said, and just a little side note, we must understand that if Hubert Minnis loses this election, Peter Turnquist becomes the leader of the party. A lot of people may not realize their constitution makes him leader because he's still deputy leader.
That's right.
And so essentially, you go back to December, you'll see when Hubert Ingram
hold on. Say that again, because Peter Turnquist isn't contesting.
No, you don't have to contest. See,
They didn't have a convention. They didn't ratify a new deputy leader, so he's still the deputy leader.
So
but what I'm asking though is, because he lost the election, don't mean that he would be losing his seat as a leader.
No, I'm saying to you, leader of the party has nothing to do where you sit in parliament.
I agree. That's the point I'm making. That
no, I'm saying to you,
the two of them are not.
But we have history. We have history where leaders have not sit in the House of Assembly with Tommy.
Yeah, no, I'm not arguing that part. I'm saying that if none of them are in the House, right? Why does that cause Minnis not to be leader of the party?
No, because what happens is Hubert Alexander Ingram set the trend. Perry Christie did not get to resign. And so it's now an expectation that if you don't win government, you would tender your resignation as leader of the party. But either way, the FNM will most likely hurriedly move to a convention. Yes. And if he resigns, Peter becomes leader. And most likely you'll see Papa go back to what Papa did, Hubert Ingram did. He endorsed Peter in December. He endorsed Peter and Sands as the future of the FNL. That's very important. Then come forward that he came and endorsed Sands. So when he went into going back to Malcolm, he is basically what Hubert Ingram said. He has the plan B, and the FNM loses. So when he comes and endorses Buru, those FNMs who was looking at Hubert Ingram endorsing the new leadership of the party begin to start looking at Malcolm saying, well, I need to go back home just in case, So there's a whole bunch of dynamics that he has put into that. And so I think somehow some bleeding of the endorsement for Buru may impact Malcolm Pine. And Malcolm Pine will basically have to come out of the gate with 3,000 voters. They'll basically hit a 60% accuracy to say those 60 to 70% of the 3,000 he started with would actually vote for him.
So you're saying that he has to give his sermon of a lifetime within the next 2 days.
Tonight.
If I could just say one other thing that I think will affect the outcome here is what I call voter suppression, because we have a register, 2017 register, we used 192,000 people, right? But you have to factor in the voter transfer issue, right? You had people from Dorian that were displaced, came to New Providence, or left Grand Bahama, went over to the Florida. We had a lot of that happening. So the problem is they don't have, really returning to Abaco, returning to Grand Bahama a year later, they're not in the house because the house was destroyed or is completely derelict. Right. It's unlivable. So they're living with a family member, but guess what? They don't have a utility bill that verifies that this is their new address. That's what you need in order to get the voter's card changed so that you could vote in the next election. I say all of that because there's a lot of people who are going to fit in that category. And then when you tackle the new voters, all of those students, persons that turned voting age since the last election, but didn't, for whatever reason, go to the register because of the snap election and all of that. They were caught off guard, surprise, whatever. Then you have your students who are away, and the centers are really distantly located in the U.S. Right, so not everyone can get to a center or whatever to get their vote in. So there's a whole bunch of factors that I think it is going to lead to about 25 to 30,000 people not voting. And I think that favors.
That's a lot.
And I think that favors the FNM, really. And so the FNM is banking on that, I believe, low voter turnout. And I think that they're banking on the snap election where, they're going to argue that Dorian and the pandemic really did them in. So they really haven't had a chance to really turn over the engine and make the changes that they want. That's why I think, despite all that I've said about Minnis being authoritarian and all of that other stuff, I think the FNM still has a good chance because of the way this snap election has unfolded. But the real big problem is, instead of campaigning on his record, he's running from his record. And you've seen time and time again when he's stood in front of people and campaigned, he's doing more mudslinging and doing less about spelling out what the plan is for his next government.
That's awesome. But folks, excuse me, folks, you've been listening to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knows. We have Dr. Chris Curry here and C. Allen Johnson, two very esteemed gentlemen in our society. One a historian, author, professor, and the other one a technical analyst of extreme heights. And if they tell you some of the numbers, look at their crunch numbers that they crunch, and Dr. Curry, the two of them have photographic memories. I don't know why they get that. I wasn't blessed with that. But, we hope you enjoyed the show and you gained some value. Hold on, I can come to you. Yeah. And you got some value out of what we've been discussing here this evening. And so if you have any other questions you want to post before we drop off, but we can now ask each of them to give us something what they would like to say to the public and the like, and wrap off the conversation we just had just now. Go ahead.
Let me just build on what Dr. Curry said. I think it's most important that the political parties and the Progressive Party more so, it is important to get people out to vote and to get them to stay and vote. That's going to be the most important thing. And I'm going to tell Bahamians that this is going to be one of the most pivotal points in our economic history. And I think it's incumbent upon them to take the necessary steps to protect themselves, social distance, wear protective covers, sanitize, but go out and vote. Encourage 5 others to go with you and actually make a decision that you think is in your personal best interest, then your country's best interest, into your personal economy. Because we are in a fiscal crisis. We are on the ledge. And we need all hands on board, and we don't need an absentee type environment said, I could have, should have, might have voted. So this is your opportunity. Protect yourself. There will be N95 masks. The PLP promised they'll have N95 masks, which is the best protection there is. Put on N95 and put your mask on top of it. Sanitize yourself and commit yourself that no matter how long it's going to take, that you will be a participant in this decision coming up.
Yes, awesome. Dr. Curry?
Yeah, I would just say to echo some of what C. Allen was saying, I think this is a seminal moment in our country's history because we are coming towards celebrating our 50th anniversary of independence. This is going to be the first election where somebody named Ingram and Christie will not be contesting. This is going to be an election that is unprecedented too because it's in a state of COVID pandemic at the height of a very virulent and highly contagious Delta variant. So we have to be safe, but we also have to be serious because voting is a very serious matter. It's probably the most important civic duty that a Bahamian citizen can participate in. And so I had to go and line up twice to get my voters card sorted out a few months ago because I changed addresses. I'm still in the same constituency, but I didn't want my change of address to nullify my ability to do the right thing as a citizen. So I just want to encourage people, don't get frustrated. I guess we kind of have a mindset we're used to lining up for things, but still keep focused and be sober-minded. It's election day, so you have every reason to be sober-minded and make your vote count.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. I surely enjoyed the show, and I'm sure a good number of persons out there have enjoyed it. We've seen a lot of comments coming online, dropped in the box on the bottom and so forth. We didn't get to speak to every one of those, but though we sure took note of them because the show was going at a rapid pace and with all of this knowledge sitting on the table in front of me. But I too would like to encourage everybody to vote, right? And don't get distracted or discouraged by the fact that all these different parameters is happening in the next 2 days and the like. That's 2 days. Listen carefully. That's 2 days. Well, you could endure for 2 days versus second guessing yourself and doubting for the next 5 years that you should have done something, and let that play on your mind for 5 years. Do what you want to do, whatever your conscience is telling you to do, by all means, but try to encourage yourself or motivate yourself to come out and vote. Many sacrifices were done for it, and we always hear that story, but it's really a benefit to us to be able to speak to our system of governance, and hopefully as we go forward, we will be able to find more ways in order to cause the public to participate in an even bigger way as we move forward. But for now, that is one of the most critical ways that we could participate. And so something to think about, encourages you to go out and vote. By all means, be safe. And so Dr. Curry and C. Allen, we'd like to thank you both. We thank all of those out there in social media who stuck around, listened to what these three old men had to say on the subject. We hope it's more value for you and the like, and we hope it equips you with more information and not just data that will allow you to decide for yourselves what you want to do and how you want to vote. And don't be a part of that 17, 20% that just decided, okay, because I'm undecided, I'm not going to go out and vote. Come out and vote. You might decide while you're standing online. Who knows, right? And such and such. So what we encourage you to do is to pause, think about it intentionally, and consider where we go from here. We want you to subscribe, like, follow, and share with all your friends, because this is some valuable information put on the table here tonight. I learned a lot myself, and I hope you would have learned yourself. And so if you want to become a sponsor or a friend of something to think about, just shoot us a note, and we'll be pleased to embrace you in the system and moving forward. So stay safe, vaccinate, or isolate. That's our motto around here. Stay hydrated, make wise decisions, and you can listen to any more of the videos at the end. There's going to be links to point you to some more if you want to listen to some more of those. Be safe. Chris, C. Allen, welcome, and we'll tune into you. And don't forget us when you go to those other higher places that you go into, that we allow you to go there, right? So peace be with you all, and safe voting, people. Good evening.
Take care.
Take care.
All right.